Reinforcing through repetition is the general logic. Thank you.
Directing the focus attention to a set of applied strategies as we see manifested in nature and human systems is critical to living the values. This is the process of selective attention, such that what is distracting is weeded out. Practical ways of being open, flexible, and courageous in pushing ourselves towards our goals is very important for sustainable, value-based success. It is important to raise our aspirations and goals from non-conscious and vaguely defined to fully conscious identification and application. Attaching values to the decisions that we make must be a conscious but automatic process. This will define our sense of belonging to a community, team, society that will build up our purpose and meaning of life. This defines the legacy that we leave behind. Focused attention that brings in conscious application requires the practical understanding of the applied values that embody the wisdom of the Bhagavad-Gita. I would like to point out some of the important applied values from the Bhagavad-Gita. The infinite rests in sacrifice, Tyaga. Optimal work comes from cooperative engagements, Yajna. Cooperation is strengthened through dedication in networking, Samarpana. Depth of know-how is paramount to excellence in a domain, Jnana. A multidimensional perspective helps reach pinnacle, Darshana. We find the first three of these tenets in the world of plants, animals, and the way nature unfolds.
The natural world is a web of intricate connections that maintain nature's finely balanced equilibrium. Animals, plants, rivers, rocks, and weather systems cooperate to maintain this equilibrium. A focused look at the world of plants and trees lead you to discover the selflessness in the ways of how Mother Nature works. The human debt to trees is absolute. Without trees, our species would not have come into being. Forests, which are dominated by trees, form carbon sinks, trapping tons of carbon dioxide released by human activities out of the atmosphere and thus mitigate human-made global warming. And they use the same pollutant that we have spewed out to provide us with food and oxygen essential for our survival and well-being. Trees are considered to be the greatest of nature's engines of photosynthesis. Apart from providing us with food and oxygen and improving our climates, trees also serve us in many ways, like conserving water, preserving soil, providing medicines, supporting wildlife, and promoting biodiversity, to name a few. I am sure you're able to glimpse the right attitudes as pronounced in the Bhagavad Gita being displayed here by the humble trees. An interesting feature that we observe is that a forest is like a social network. Like us, they live with their children, communicating and supporting them as they grow, sharing nutrients with those who are sick and warning each other of impending dangers, thus creating a microclimate suitable for their growth and sustenance. It has also been discovered now that forests are the world's most exemplary cooperators and superorganisms. They have a mutualistic relationship with the soil fungi termed as mycorrhizae. These mycorrhizal networks connect vegetation in an intimate network, helping in nutrient exchange and to transmit signals between trees and exchange news about insects, droughts, and other dangers. Nutrient exchange and helping neighbors in times of need is the rule. These fungi operate much like our fiber optic internet cables and has been called as the Wood Wide Web. The fungal networks act as a gigantic redistribution mechanism. With their help, the trees equalizes the differences between the strong and the weak. This equalization takes place through the roots. Whoever has an abundance of sugar hands some over. Whoever is running short gets help, ensuring that no one is left behind. They thus grow together, with nutrients and water being optimally divided among them so that each tree can grow into the best tree it can be. It is interesting to note at this point that the mycorrhizal connection patterns have similarities with our brains. They are perceiving, communicating, responding to one another by emitting chemical signals, chemicals identical to our neurotransmitters, and signals created by ions cascading across fungal membranes, similar to our nerve impulses. On its own, a tree cannot establish a consistent local climate, but together they create an ecosystem, moderate extremes of heat and cold, store a great deal of water, and generate a great deal of humidity. They somehow seem to understand that a tree can only be as strong as the forest that surrounds it. If left undisturbed, they form healthier, happier, and more productive forests, serving humanity and the whole world in their own selfless ways. Thus, these trees uniting to form a fully functioning forest show us that the whole is greater than its parts. The attitudes of Yajna Bhava, Tyaga Bhava, and Samarpana Bhava in action.
The wonders of Mother Nature never cease to amaze us. Just like in the plant kingdom, the bhavas of Yajna, Samarpana, and Tyaga are seen manifested in the animal kingdom too. The mutualistic networks between the plants and the bees can be considered as one of the major factors for the stability of biodiversity, which is essential for our survival. Feeding on the nectar of flowers, the bees aid in the pollination of plants and thus sustain life on earth. They are necessary for entire ecosystems to function. Putting it simply, man cannot survive without bees. In spite of the fact that man, for his selfish needs, harvests the honey, the fruits of their hard labor, the bees do not fret and mourn. Instead, they continue with their efforts. doing their duty as nature has endowed upon them, serving the world selflessly. Honeybees are fascinating creatures that live together in large, well-organized groups. They are social and cooperative insects that somehow instinctively understand that individually they would not be able to survive, but that together they could form a strong and efficient superorganism. Now, in a bee colony, all the bees do what is best for the group. Their strength lies in the fact that they share the same goal and work together for a mission larger than itself. Division of labor and collaboration of all the bees are important survival strategies that they optimize to the needs of the colony at all times. The workers, the queen, the drones, all have specific tasks to perform. Depending on the tasks assigned to them by nature, they collect nectar and pollen, build architecturally amazing hives for storing honey, and breed to give rise to the next generation. Feeding the young, cleaning, guarding, and ventilating the hive are all done in a collective manner. An effective system of communication exists between them, using chemical pheromones and communicative dances or movements. Let us now look into a video depicting this collective endeavor of honey making by the bees.
One healthy hive will make and consume more than 50 kilograms of honey in a single year, and that takes a lot of work. Honey is made from nectar, but it doesn't come out of flowers as that golden sticky stuff. But after finding a suitable food source, bees dive in head first, using their long, specially adapted tongues to slurp up tiny sips of nectar into one of two stomachs. A single bee might have to drink from more than 1,000 flowers to fill its honey stomach, which can weigh as much as the bee itself when full of nectar. Now, on the way back to the hive, digestive enzymes are already working to turn that nectar into sweet gold. When she returns to the hive, the forager bee will vomit the nectar into the mouth of another worker, and that bee will vomit it into another bee's mouth, and so on. This game of regurgitation telephone is an important part of the honey making process, since each bee adds more digestive enzymes to turn long chains of complex sugars in the raw nectar into simple monosaccharides like fructose and glucose. Now at this point, the nectar is still pretty watery, so the bees beat their wings and create an air current inside the hive to evaporate and thicken the nectar, finally capping the cell with beeswax so the enzyme-rich bee barf can complete its transformation into honey. Because of its low water content and acidic pH, honey isn't a very inviting place for bacteria or yeast spoilage, and has an incredibly long shelf life in the hive or in your pantry. Honey has even been found in Egyptian tombs dating back thousands of years, pretty much unspoiled, although I wouldn't personally eat it, just in case. For 1 pound of honey, tens of thousands of foraging bees will together fly more than 3 times around the world and visit up to 8 million flowers. That takes teamwork and organization, and although they can't talk, they do communicate with body language. Foragers dance to tell other bees where to find food. A circle dance means flowers are pretty close to the hive, but for food that's farther away, they get their waggle on. The waggle dance of the honeybee was first decoded by Carl von Frisch, and it's definitely one of the coolest examples of animal communication in nature. First, the bee walks in a straight line, wagging its body back and forth and vibrating its wings, before repeating in a figure 8. Now, whatever angle the bee walks while waggling tells the other bees what direction to go. If it's straight up the line of the honeycombs, then the food is in the direction of the sun. If the dance is pointed to the left or the right, the other bees know to fly at that angle relative to the sun. The longer the waggle, the farther away the food is. And the better the food, the more excited the bee shakes its body. If that's not amazing enough, even if they can't see the sun itself, they can infer where it is and the time of day by reading the polarization of light in the blue sky. A single bee is a pretty simple creature, but together they create highly complex and social societies. There's three main classes in a beehive: drones, workers, and queens. Now, when a new queen is born, she immediately runs around and kills her sisters because there can be only one. Now, during mating season, she'll fly to a distant hive to mate with several males and store away their sperm, which she'll use back at her home hive to lay more than 1,000 eggs a day throughout the rest of her life. Any unfertilized eggs, those that don't join up with sperm, will mature into male drones, which means they only have one set of chromosomes. But fertilized eggs are all genetically female. They're destined to become either queens or workers. Now, queens do the egg laying, of course, but worker bees are the backbone of the beehive. So what makes most females become workers while just one wears the hive crown? A baby bee's diet activates genetic programming that shifts its entire destiny. Every bee larva is initially fed a nutrient-rich food called royal jelly. But after a few days, worker bee babies are switched to a mixture of pollen and honey called bee bread. But queens eat royal jelly their whole life, even as adults. Scientists used to think it was just royal jelly that put queens on the throne, but just last year, they discovered one chemical in bee bread, the food that queens don't get, that keeps worker bees sterile. Being a queen seems to be just as much about what bees don't eat as what they do. Making honey is insect farming on its grandest scale, with intricate societies cooperating to make a food fit for bear tummies big and small, with the pleasant side effect of pollinating most of the world's flowering plants. I'd say it's a pretty sweet deal.
Another interesting fact about the bees is their ability to create collectively a structurally amazing home for themselves. Let us take a look.
This almost looks man-made, manufactured. I mean, it doesn't look like something from the natural world. The precision, the fine straight lines that they've created is extraordinary.
Right. It's an engineering wonder for sure.
Look at that, it's perfect.
Yeah.
Hexagons here.
Yeah, it is amazing. And the hexagon is a very strong structure.
The bees have made an identical pattern to the columns on the Giant's Causeway. Each cell is exactly like the others, 6 walls meeting precisely at 120 degrees. And every honeybee, everywhere in the world, knows how to build these shapes. It's as if the hexagon is built into the bee's DNA.
You can see the bees going down inside the cell. It's almost exactly the same size as their bodies. So
Right.
Are they using their body like a ruler in some sense to do the geometry?
I would say that's an accurate description. I know different races have a smaller body and the cell size in their comb is smaller.
And each of the hexagons, how do they actually make a hexagon rather than some irregular shape?
They've just done it for thousands and thousands of years. They were born to do it. They just instinctively know that this is the shape of their home.
But there's more to the bee's behavior than raw instinct. There's another reason why they build in hexagons. And to reveal that reason, we need to turn to the universal language of all nature, mathematics. The bees' primary need is to store as much honey as they can, while using as little precious wax as possible.
The bee's honeycomb is an amazing piece of engineering, but why have they evolved to produce this hexagonal pattern? Well, actually, they don't have too many choices. If you try to put pentagons together, for example, they just don't fit together nicely, or circles leave lots of little gaps. If they want to produce a network of regular shapes which fit together neatly, then you've really only got 3 options. You can do equilateral triangles, or you could do squares, or you can do the bee's hexagons. But why of those 3 does the bee choose the hexagons? Well, it turns out that the triangles actually use much more wax than any of the other shapes. Squares are a little better, but it's the hexagons which use the least amount of wax.
It's a solution that was only mathematically proven a few years ago. The hexagonal array is the most efficient storage solution the bees could have chosen. Yet with a little help from evolution, they worked it out for themselves millions of years ago.
The hives thus created with such care and precision are often subjected to high winds or other forces which causes them to shake or threatens to destabilize them. But the bees seem to be able to work together and mitigate this too. Let us now watch this mysterious mechanical stability of a honeybee cluster.
This hanging mass is made entirely of bees. The swarm can hold itself together, even when shaken about by the wind. Now, a team of scientists have been finding out how. About once a year, colonies of honeybees leave their nests in swarms, searching for a new home. Until they find a new site, the bees rest in these temporary clusters. The clusters are often found in trees, but this one is forming in a lab at Harvard in Massachusetts. Little do the bees know, they're about to go for a ride. The researchers built this shaking apparatus to investigate how the bee swarm reacts to movement. When shaken from side to side, shearing forces act on the colony, with the bees at the top taking the brunt of it as they try to hold up everything beneath them. The forces threaten to destabilize the whole colony, so the bees do something clever. They spread out. The flatter shape changes the colony's center of mass, and so it wobbles less, reducing the pressure on the bees. It makes sense. Imagine you're standing up and you find the ground shaking beneath you. Instinctively, you'd crouch down. Same principle. Anyway, what's particularly interesting here is that the forces at play are acting on the swarm as a whole, but each bee can't see the shape of the swarm, so how does it know where to go or what to do? To find out, researchers tracked the bees on the outside of the swarm. As the colony shook, they moved upwards to where the stress is greatest. The researchers modeled this behavior and found that if all the bees follow the rule, move towards the area of higher stress, the colony flattens out, increasing its stability and so decreasing the average stress on each bee. Great for the colony, but individual bees are actively putting themselves under more stress to do it. This kind of altruistic behavior is not very common in nature, except that is in eusocial insects like bees and ants, which rely on altruism for survival. What's more, even though each individual bee doesn't necessarily know what's going on, by simply moving towards an area of higher stress, the colony as a whole acts intelligently. This is called emergent intelligence, and some scientists think that it's through a process like this that individual neurons firing in our brain can collectively come together to make, well, us. Talk about a hive mind.
This collective intelligence, called the swarm intelligence, identifies problems and takes democratic decisions to find the best suited solutions and work in a collaborative manner to safeguard and uplift their community. Again, Yajna, Samarpana and Tyaga Bhavas in action. Interestingly, recent research has thrown light on the parallels between the bees in a colony and the neurons of a human brain. So, taking a cue from the honeybees, we could make our communities more connected. We could grow faster together and overall be more creative, productive, and enriching.
We can also observe these traits in any successful and synchronized human group activity. In any field of excellence in team activities, we see the same manifestation of selfless attitudes and synchronized networks. Take the case of the typical Panchari Melam that resonates the courtyards of temples in Kerala during festival times. The art and performance of Panchari Melam is all about teamwork, specialization, and synchrony, transcending the individual expressions of skill and dexterity. It is definitely of individual brilliance in the chosen specialization, but the Melam is much more than its parts. It is not just the sum of those parts. The combined synchrony includes specific patterns of beats, rhythm, and structure. The Panchari Melam represents Sattva Guna and elevates listeners to higher pedestals. A Panchari Melam has 5 stages, each of them based on beats totaling 96, 48, 24, 12, and 6 respectively. The crescendo rises higher with each stage, eventually culminating in the 5th stage with a 6-beat cycle.
This is an orchestra of 5 instruments, namely Chanda, Idam Thala and Valam Thala, that is Urutu Chanda and Veekam Chanda, Kombu, Kuyal and Idattalam. The Pramanakars, that is the senior most of Chanda and Kuyal, who are just facing each other, with codes and symbols like bending and rounding Kuyal or nodding gestures, directs the Mela. Now let me direct your thoughts to the mother trees. Decisions on duration, times of kalasham, time allotment for each phase of drumming are instantly conveyed by the movement of the head to players sitting on both sides by the senior and is transmitted to all members. Composed of individual performers of each type of instrument, all these individuals together make up the Melam orchestra. Each of these have specialized parts to play, yet no one interferes in the other's role. But together, the synchronized work of this complex team gives rise to performances of gigantic proportions. The overall pattern that emerges is the melodious Melam, where, just as in the case of bees, division of labor and collaboration are essential survival strategies. structure of Mela is the inner core of the team's performance. Each individual does justice to their thread composed of a particular instrument. These threads combine to produce the overall effect. We enjoy a pattern as a whole, not as individual threads. The structure is in control, not as a physical element. That is the self of the orchestra. So, what do we learn from these patterns from nature and from those of successful teams? Individuals need to work within constraints. Individuals are assigned roles and they need to work with perfection. Teams of individuals need to perform their role together, and perfection is achieved through such symphony. All of this exemplifies the attitudes of yajna, tyaga, and samarpana bhavas, or the attitude of cooperation, the sense of sacrifice and dedication. Thus, the Brahman is rooted in sacrifice.
की रानी।
जय जय भगवद गीते।
दया सुधा बरसावनी। मातु कृपा की जय।
मातु कृपा की जय।
हरिपद प्रेम दान कर।
हरिपद प्रेम दान कर।
अपनों कर लीजे।
जय जय भगवद गीते।
जय भगवद गीते। जय जय भगवद गीते। हरिः कमल विहारिणि।
हरिः कमल विहारिणि।
सुंदर सुपुनीते।
जय जय भगवद गीते।
Take over.
Thank you, Uncle. Finally, we express our gratitude to everyone who took time out of their busy schedules to attend this program. We hope you enjoyed it. We also want to extend our appreciation to the participants of this program. Hope it was a great experience. Shubharatri, Shubhanidra.
पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ